At a whopping 456 pounds, Angus Barberry was on a fast track to his grave. Although he seemed like just a normal guy working at his fish and chip shop with his dad, what he was about to do next would revolutionize the way the world understands the true limits of human biology. On June 14, 1965, Angus walked into the Maryfield Hospital in Scotland with the firm intention to turn his life around. His doctors initially envisioned a shorter-term therapeutic fast, which at the time wasn't an uncommon practice for treating severe obesity. This usually only lasted a few days or weeks at the very most. Because of this, the doctors agreed to supervise him on his fat loss journey, initially only expecting it to be short-term, warning him he shouldn't ever consider going past the 40-day mark. So for the first phase of his fast, the doctors ensured that he stayed in the hospital to ensure everything was going smoothly. Once they realized Angus seemed to be in good health and feeling well, they eventually let him go home to continue his fast, coming back to the hospital periodically to get his blood work done. The doctors assisted him with electrolytes and vitamin supplements. Black coffee, tea, and water were the only things Angus consumed for the entirety of his fast. And miraculously, by the 40-day mark, Angus said he felt good, wasn't even that hungry at all, and wanted to continue. Initially hesitant, his doctors eventually agreed to let him continue, given that he seemed to be in good health based on his blood work. So what's going on here? Wouldn't you get gradually hungrier and hungrier as time goes on? Well, after the first 3 to 5 days, Angus's hunger likely completely disappeared. At about 8 hours into Angus's fast, his body likely started using up the stored glucose in his liver, known as glycogen. Once the body starts burning through these stored glucose stores, it starts creating something called ketones. Ketones are made from the breakdown of fat, often known as ketosis or the body's fat burning mode. Ketones are an extremely efficient energy source, providing more energy per unit of oxygen used. Ketosis can have a number of benefits, from reducing inflammation to increasing BDNF, which is known as Miracle-Gro for the brain. At 456 pounds, had lots of body fat to fuel his body. Even though the doctors were surprised at Angus's ability to go home after the initial phase, for him it probably wasn't that hard. Not only because he had such a strong drive to hit his goal weight, but because he wasn't even hungry in the first place. This can go horribly wrong if not done properly under proper supervision. Take the Williamson sisters for example. In the early 1900s, Claire and Dora Williamson looked to Dr. Linda Hazard as a way to purify their bodies. But instead of being a doctor looking to help, she was more of a doctor looking to manipulate and take advantage of them. This is when the Williams sisters arrived at Dr. Linda Hazard's sanitarium called Wilderness Heights. This was supposed to be a health retreat, those looking to purify their bodies. Soon after the sisters arrived, Linda persuaded them to grant her power of attorney and began forming their will. Before they knew it, Linda was putting them on week-long fasts, but even to begin with, the Williamson sisters did not have excessive amounts of fat. So even after weeks of fasting and begging for food, Linda denied their request, promising them that this was just the purification process and ensuring them that they would die if they ate solid food. But of course, given that they were excessively fasting and not listening to their bodies during a time when they needed to eat again, their bodies started eating away at themselves. Since there was minimal fat left, their bodies started breaking down the muscles and organs to use as fuel. This led to the death of Claire, weighing less than 50 pounds at the time. But luckily for Dora, there was help on the way. When she was found, she was lying on the floor almost dead, while Linda was wearing Claire's dress. Dr. Linda Hazard was then sentenced to 2 years in prison, then soon after tried to cure her own illness with fasting and died from the fast. Given horror stories like this, it was no surprise that people were skeptical of Angus going so long without food. But the key difference is that he was under proper medical supervision and had more than enough fat to sustain him for the entirety of his fast. So even when things seemed off, he was always able to get checkups to make sure everything was in check. And because he wasn't consuming any food, his bowel movements were very infrequent, usually once every 4 to 6 weeks, which was actually noted to be completely normal in this situation. Just because they were so infrequent does not mean that he was constipated. It really just depends on the context of what you are or are not eating that determines what is regular. For example, many people that switch to a carnivore diet may notice bowel movements are much less frequent and smaller in size since there is no fiber in meat. But as long as you are eating the proper ratios of fat and protein, this is completely normal. Whereas the opposite is generally the case on a standard or high fiber diet. Given that fiber itself is completely indigestible by humans, bowel movements should be far more frequent in this context. Whereas on a low or no fiber diet like the carnivore diet, your body is actually able to absorb most of what you are eating, leaving far less to be expelled by the body. Now obviously there was a point where Angus needed to get things moving again, and would need to eat so he did not starve to death. Over 380 days into his fast, Angus actually started to get hungry again. Now this is where most people mess up. Angus did in fact lose some muscle during the course of his entire fast, but it wasn't much. Compare this to David Blaine, who fasted for 44 days suspended in a box. He lost 60 pounds, which ended up being mostly muscle, about 23 pounds. If Angus would have lost muscle at this rate, he would have died. So what was the difference? Well, he was allowed to move around. Now, it's not a good idea to overdo exercise while fasting, but no movement or exercise at all is a guaranteed way to break down muscle as quickly as possible during a fast. While in deep ketosis, protein breakdown is about half of what it normally is. This is why it is ideal to get into ketosis as quickly as possible when starting a fast, since ketones prevent muscle breakdown, which has a lot to do with the fact that ketosis reduces inflammation in the body. Because of this, it's ideal to avoid eating lots of carbs and to eat more fat and protein like a ketogenic style before a fast, so you are more easily able to get into ketosis to prevent muscle protein breakdown. Exercise also increases this transition because it increases the use of glucose to then force your body to start making ketones. But as Angus was running out of fuel to help his body thrive in a ketogenic state, it was finally time to eat. It was reported that his doctors put him on a liquid diet for the last 10 days to avoid refeeding syndrome. Refeeding syndrome is often induced by eating too much overall, or just eating too many carbohydrates to end a fast. This is because the carbs will rapidly spike insulin, which can pull minerals like phosphate and potassium with the glucose into your cells. This results in there not being enough in the blood, which can cause heart or muscle problems or even cause your heart to stop. This is why it's so important to break a fast with a small, high fat and protein meal, like a small fatty steak for example. Another reason it is ideal to eat protein after a prolonged fast is to offset any small amount of muscle loss. Why? The rate of protein breakdown actually stays lower even after breaking the fast, while muscle protein synthesis stays the same, making it much easier to put on more muscle right after a fast. Angus broke his fast with one hard-boiled egg with a slice of toast with butter. He told reporters, "I thoroughly enjoyed my egg and feel very full." During his fast, he steadily lost weight, mostly fat, at roughly 3/4 of a pound per day, losing a total of 276 pounds, which he and his doctors noted that the weight loss rate was steady and sustained. And even 5 years later, he kept the weight off, weighing only 196 pounds. The case report on Angus stated, "Prolonged fasting in this patient had no ill effects." Now, this is a huge contrast to say the Biggest Loser contestants, which are often put through a protocol of strict dieting and intense exercise routines. Many of them report to not only gain the weight back, but become even hungrier than ever before. So what's the main difference between Angus Barbieri and one of the Biggest Loser contestants? Well, surprisingly, it was likely very easy for Angus not to overeat again. He just wasn't that hungry. He said he felt very full after only eating one egg and a piece of toast after not eating anything for an entire year. If you just reduce the total amount of food or cut calories, your body interprets it as being in a temporary food famine. Since there is just barely enough food for you to survive, your body naturally lowers its metabolism in an effort to try to stretch out what it is getting in. Whereas if you just completely cut off the food supply, your body more easily allows you to access your energy stores by increasing your metabolism, increasing growth hormone, and increasing the production of ketones that support brain function. All of this together would have been super advantageous, like a biological supercharge, to help aid in a hunt or to obtain nutrition thousands of years ago. So this mechanism was actually very beneficial for the survival of our species. So by fasting for over a year straight and losing 276 pounds, Angus Barberry helped us better understand the true limits of our physiology and why it functions the way it does. Prolonged fasting, when done properly under the right medical supervision, can be super beneficial for fat loss. If done improperly, it can actually lead to muscle loss or even death. So what do you think of Angus's story?